21. I tried to tell you, Bach sing-songed as the hypervator stopped in level 7 and the door slid open. Cass wanted to roll his eyes, but he felt like any voluntary movement might cause him to throw up right there in the corridor. Bach still held on to him, keeping him upright and from collapsing to the ground. When they'd heard the klaxon and the announcement from Evie, he and Zenfor had rushed to the hypervator in an attempt to get to the bridge as quickly as possible. Cass had tried the comm system, but she wasn't answering him. Had he known the deleterious effect the trip would have on them while the ship vibrated, he never would have tried it. And it ended up being in vain anyway. The ship was now being pulled closer to the center of the phenomenon. "Tell him what?" Zenfor asked. "That he should have followed Commander Diazal's orders," Box replied, "instead of going off on his own." Cass exchanged glances with Nurse Mankel, who averted his eyes, looking embarrassed to be overhearing this conversation. "Can we discuss this another time?" he asked, his voice strained. "Why? Everyone already knows you broke protocol," Box replied. "How?" "She didn't make the report public," he replied. "I think Chief Raffinkel had something to do with it. When you didn't return to the bay, I recall her asking me something about your work ethic." "Box, you could have told me." Now he was going to throw up. "It wouldn't have mattered. She'd already written you up. All that would have done is aggravate you further. Then you couldn't have made any progress in the Genesis." Zenfor turned to him. "How do you know about the Genesis?" "Who do you think told him about it?" Zenfor turned back to Cass. "Perhaps he should be assisting me, and not you." The entire corridor spun wildly, and Cass lost what little footing he'd gained with Box's help, collapsing in his arms. "Boss, I know you've fallen for me, but this is over the top. Can't see." "Hold him there, Box." Mankel shone a light into Cass's eyes. It spun too. "Let's get him to Zach's double time." Cass felt himself being hoisted up, and then not only was the corridor spinning, but it was bouncing along as if he was on the death loop on Atari 7. He'd only been once as a kid and had found most of the rides too extreme for him. But he'd tried the death loop on a dare and regretted it ever since. He shut his eyes, hoping he couldn't see the inside of his eyelids spinning. "Something doesn't feel right," he said. His head was splitting despite the darkness, and the queasy feeling was getting worse. He still hadn't thrown up yet, though it usually didn't take much. "Put him over there," Mankel ordered, and Cass had the sensation of falling, but then being on something solid. "Box, immobilize him. He'll roll off the table otherwise." The feeling of a tight blanket all around him, keeping him in place, materialized, and he had the sensation of the table being turned upside down and him hanging from the ceiling. Had they lost gravity? He didn't want to open his eyes to look. "Cass, can you hear me?" It was Dr. Zachs. He tried to nod, but thought better of it. "Yeah. You're going to be okay. Some of the components in your inner ears have been dislodged. We're fixing them now, and you should feel better in a few moments." Cass could only trust her on that. It felt like what little tethered to reality he'd had disappeared, and he was free-falling through space. He could imagine himself out there in the darkness, being pulled toward whatever creature was in the middle, invisible and dark, and having no control over his own body. That's what this felt like. He needed his anchor back, otherwise he'd never be able to focus on anything ever again. "Caspian, try opening your eyes," Zach said. He squinted, then wrenched them open to find the room was no longer spinning. "Everything look okay?" Zach asked. He nodded. "Let's get you mobile." She pressed a button under the table, and suddenly he could move again. "Try sitting up." Cass did, and while there was a small wobble in his vision, it wasn't anything like it had been. "Better?" "Yeah, everything's stabilized." Zach smirked with her small mouth. "See? Simple inner ear repair. Your ride in the hypervator must have shaken you up too much, enough to cause some damage. But I did a scan. Looks like everything else is fine." Cass glanced around the room. Box was off in the corner, working on something he couldn't see. Mankel attended to Zenfor, who sat on the edge of the next table over, her back to him. What about you? Feeling okay? I feel fine now. It was only temporary. Her ear construction is similar to ours, but much sturdier. Michael showed Cass the scan he'd taken of Zenfor. Less prone to problems like the ones we're used to. I've had a thought, Zenfor said. These electromagnetic strands holding the ship may have a lower range limit. They might not hold onto something small, Zenfor said. Like the Space Wing fighters, Cass replied. If we could reverse the electromagnetic signature of each strand holding the ship at the same time, she could break free. You're right. The doors to sickbay opened to reveal Evie. Cass recoiled, wishing Zax had put him under. He also thought he heard a noise like a snicker from Box, but he couldn't be sure. Commander, she said, approaching them. Feeling better? Cass had a difficult time meeting her eye. She'd been right about the Space Wings all along, and because of him, she'd been underprepared on the bridge. He should have stayed and helped finish what he'd been ordered to do. But they still had more modifications to make, if Zenfor was correct. And wasn't she the one who'd come up with the idea of using the ships to deflect the electromagnetic strands produced by the Cryon radiation? A type of radiation the Coalition wasn't even aware of without Zenfor scanning technology. Evie may have been on the right track, but she hadn't been able to get all the way there on her own. Better, yeah. He hopped down from the table. He thought he felt the vertigo again and would be on his ass in seconds, but then it stabilized, and he was fine. Glad to hear it. I want an update on when the Space Wings will be ready. Cass turned to Zenfor. The Council has proposed a solution that might make them more effective out there, but it's going to require some further modification. All the additional power to the anti-grav generators has been completed. She narrowed her eyes at him. Did you file the report? Not yet. I was on my way as soon as I was done here, he lied. Evie pulled her lips between her teeth. I see. Give us 12 more hours for the rest, Cass blurted out, having no idea how long it would take. He just needed to tell her something to get her to leave him alone. Zenfor shot him a glance, but he ignored it. 12 hours. She seemed to consider it a moment, but her gaze was impossible to meet. I'll tell the captain. She left without another word. Box shuffled over and whispered. What's the term? You play with fire, so stay out of the kitchen? No, wait. You can't make an omelet without... No, hang on. Fire burns hottest when it's stoked. That's it, isn't it? Cass brushed him away. I know what I'm doing, and she's not making this any easier. It's fine. Whatever you say, boss. Box returned to the far side of the room at his duties. Cass flagged down Zax, who had retreated to her office at some point after Evie had come in. Free to go? He mouthed. She stuck her head around the edge of the door. You should both be fine. If you feel any other symptoms, come back immediately. Thanks, Cass said, then turned and said the same to Menkel. Menkel only nodded and returned to his own duties. Outside sickbay, he and Zenfor made their way down the corridor. Should we head to the bays to make the modifications? He asked. You go. I need to return to the lab to discern the electromagnetic signature of these strands holding onto the ship. I'll have to compare the data from all 3 time periods. Once I've determined each signature, I'll send it to you so you can set up an opposite signature in each space wing. You may want to call the commander back and tell her 12 hours is a conservative estimate. I'll let her know, Cass said, unsure whether he would or not. He didn't want to go back on his word, but he also didn't want to miss another deadline, especially after everything that had happened so far. Zenfor stopped him. Why did you do that? And why do you insist on continuing to antagonize Commander Diazol? She has been nothing but helpful. He screwed up his face. How could he explain this? I know it probably looks strange. It doesn't make sense, for either of you. Cass shrugged. This is just something humans do sometimes. She's upset with me, I'm upset with her. But we both have to keep working together, so things can get tense. And how long do you expect to be upset with each other? I don't want to encounter this alien force and your minds be somewhere else, especially if she's in command at the time. It isn't that big of a deal, Cass said. I'm sure she's not even thinking about it that much. Senford turned and resumed her path down the hall. You seem to be. Do I? Well, I'm not. But I do have a lot on my mind, he called after her. She didn't say anything else, only led them back toward the closest hypervator. But before they reached it, Cass stopped her. I've been thinking, what if we temporarily install your sensors on Tempest? It might give us an edge over this alien threat. She glared at him. I thought I made myself clear about the use of our technology. Yes, but you also said it was permissible if we were in mortal danger. Don't you think that's what that is out there? She pulled away from him. I don't know what that is, which is the entire reason I'm on this ship. But I will not allow you to install our technology on this ship. Nothing leaves my control. Do you understand? Yeah, I just thought it might be useful. Then you could delete everything after we'd sent reports to the Coalition. No. Her face was as if she was made of stone. She wasn't even blinking. He tried to play it off. It was just a thought. No, it wasn't, she said, stepping into the open hypervator and placing her hand out so the doors wouldn't close again. It was you trying to manipulate the situation for your own benefit. Something I expressly asked you not to do. I now see that uniform suits you because you are becoming more like the rest of them all the time, lying and scheming to get what you want. But you won't get it from me. From here on out, you are forbidden to view any of my work. She let go of the partition, and the hypervator door slid closed. 22. Cass couldn't seem to clear his head the entire way down to Bay 2. If thoughts of an argument with Evie didn't keep popping up, Zenfor's words would come back and play on repeat instead. What in the hell was going on? He was trying to do his job, damn it. If he didn't know better, he'd have thought he'd been treated better when he was a criminal. He searched for Chief Raffenkull. She'd have to recall the pilots if they weren't already down here so they could get to work on their ships. Cass wasn't even sure how many they'd need to modify. But he wasn't about to leave until the job was done this time. Another thought had managed to creep its way into the recesses of his mind, waiting until the fog of his complex relationships with the crew cleared. What if this creature at the center of this thing was intelligent? What if this was its way of trying to communicate, and it didn't understand what it was doing to them? He hadn't wanted to consider it, but as a Coalition officer, he had no choice. The possibility existed that these electromagnetic bands holding the ship were an attempt at saying hello. A survey ship should be doing this job, not a stealth vessel. Every hour they wasted trying to get away from this thing, the Andromeda swarm grew closer. And Tempest was the only hope for giving the Coalition any preliminary information about them, which Cass hoped included their intent. As soon as he knew what they wanted, he'd feel a lot better. Raffenkull stood in the corner of the bay at one of the mechanics stations, speaking with a crewman, as Cass approached. As soon as she saw him, her face fell. Not you again. She put her hands on her hips. I thought I made it clear to command I didn't want someone down here who couldn't finish the job. The job got done, didn't it? Cass countered. That's not, Chief. I know you don't want me here, but this is how it's going to be. We have a second round of modifications we need to make to the fighters, so I need you to recall the pilots so we can get to work. I don't take orders from you or Coalition Central, Mr. Rabot, she replied, so you can go shove your order up your ass. The crewman glanced between them, her eyes wide. You're on a Coalition Central ship, so you're subject to the rank just like everyone else. I know you know how this works. Recall your pilots, Chief. She gave him a hard stare, massaging the area around her lips with one hand, as if to consider if she should beat the crap out of him right here or comply with the order. Raffenkull stepped forward. Yeah, I know how it works on this ship, little man, she said. She wasn't much taller than Cass, but it was enough so he had to glance up slightly to meet her eyeline. And I told you, I don't work with officers who can't be trusted to do the job. In this situation, you don't have a choice. Go ahead and file a formal complaint with my commanding officer. The work still has to get done. and I'm the only one who can do it. So either report me or do your job." Her eyes flashed, but she didn't move. "Zorus," she said, "get Grippen, Ryant, and Jan on the horn. Tell them to report to Bay 2. "Yes, Chief," Crewman Zorus replied. Cass broke Raffinkill's gaze to look at the crewman who had turned to her own monitor. So this was Zorus. He searched for a scar on her head where he had hit her with a shuttle, but found nothing. It was like it never happened. He wondered if she knew who he was. "They'll be here in a few minutes," she said, glancing up. Her eyes briefly met Cass's before she looked away. "You know where the ships are," Raffinkill said. "I assume you don't need me to show you, sir." Cass considered responding, but headed for the line of space wings along the wall instead. That went well. Regardless of Raffinkill's feelings toward him, this had to get done. At least the pilots themselves seemed to be less antagonistic. Though that had been before he'd left. No telling what things were going to be like after he'd left Box with them. "Well, if it isn't Captain Vomit himself," Ryan's booming voice announced as he entered the bay, with Griffin close on his heels. He had a wide grin on his face and gestured wildly with his hands. "Man, I didn't know a person could throw up as much as you have in your life, but I guess it's possible." "What?" Cass hadn't thrown up at all as far as he could recall. The vertigo had been stabilized before anything had gone flying. "Box, man. He told us all about it." Ryan clapped Cass on the back. "Said you'd get shit-faced at least 3 times a week. And there'd be days he'd have to drag your ass back to your ship as he left a trail of vomit in your wake." "Like an undercurrent trail," Grippen said, sticking her head around Ryan, laughing. "Yeah. He said he nicknamed you Captain Vomit. He never told you?" Cass took a deep breath. "No, he never told me." "That is one crazy robot you've got there. He had stories on top of stories on top of stories." Cass groaned. "Is it true you transported the Princess of Chloristria back to her homeworld, and then got stiffed on the bill?" "Oh, I love her. She's so glamorous," Grippen added, flashing her large eyelashes. "It's too bad she's part of the Commonwealth. I'd love to meet her one day. Is she nice? Everyone says she's a piece of work, but I bet she's nice in real life." She's okay," Cass replied, remembering how the princess had tried on more than one occasion to get him to drop his guard, which would have given her guards an excuse to dismember him, one appendage at a time. "And she didn't stiff me. Another courier got in the way, tried to steal my fare." "You shoot him?" Ryan asked, a big grin on his face. "No, I don't kill people in cold blood. Maddox was misguided." "What was she wearing when you saw her?" Grippen asked. "Was it the Tal Shavas dress? Or was it something more conservative, something by Proxima or Bargon?" "Are we going to talk all day or get to work?" Cass turned to see Captain Jan standing directly behind him. Where had she come from? Grippen leaned close to Cass, whispering, "You can tell me about the dress later." "What did you need us down here for again?" Ryan asked, staring up at his ship, which sat directly in front of them. "We have more modifications to make. Box told me you managed to finish the anti-grav enhancements." Ryan smiled. "Got mine up to 212%. Way better than these two." Grippen punched him on the arm. "Still over 200. Like 7 extra percent is going to make a difference anyway." Jan stood beside them, staring at the line of ships along the wall. "And what about the other fighters? Were you able to modify them all?" "Except for the chiefs. She said she would do it herself," Grippen replied. "She's not really one for going with the grain, but she gets the job done, just in her own way." That was a relief to Cass. He didn't want to interact with the woman again today, if he could help it. "We discovered some new information about this thing we're stuck inside. It's generating a type of radiation we couldn't detect before, producing these electromagnetic bands that have a hold on the ship." "So it isn't actually a gravity well," Jan said. "No. But now that we understand it better, we know how to combat it." "You mean we did all that work for nothing?" Ryan whined. "Talk about a waste of time. Not for nothing. It might still be useful. But what we need to do now is turn each of the space wings into electromagnetic mirrors." We use each ship to emit an opposing signal and hopefully disrupt the bands. That way, Tempest can escape. But won't our ships be stuck then? Gribbon asked, pulling her loose hair back into a blue ponytail. Sanford doesn't think the bands will affect ships as small as the Space Wings. They go for the larger prey. Prey? Jan asked. You mean this thing is trying to kill us? We don't know yet. So far, there's nothing that would indicate that. But I'm not so sure. Green seems to think it's nothing other than the creature's natural habitat, like a whale in the ocean. Ryan shrugged off his flight jacket, revealing muscular arms. Let's get started. I don't want to be here all day. Cass tapped his comm. Sanfor, status update. When will you have those first set of calculations for us? I'm sending them through in a few moments. We'll need 9 ships total. Gribbon groaned. Looks like another day in the salt mines. She walked over to where crewman Zora stood at her station and leaned over the desk, saying something Cass couldn't hear. Though he noticed Ravenkel hadn't moved, she'd been watching him interact with her pilots this entire time. When his eyes met hers, she didn't turn away, only intensified the stare until Cass finally averted his gaze. It was going to be a long day. That's number 5, Ryan said, closing up one of the panels beneath the fighter. He wiped his brow and stored his calibrator back in his toolbox. You know, this would be a lot easier if they sent us some extra help. Cass brought up a manifest on the small pad he'd borrowed from Zoris. He was tired and dirty, but he wasn't about to stop. They wouldn't be able to do much. Even if they could help make the modifications, I'd still have to go back behind them and check all their work. This way, I know it's being done right the first time. We can't have any mistakes. Man, it's times like these when I wish the chief wasn't so strict about our upkeep on these things. She says a pilot is responsible for his own ship. I don't see Iavaron or Linkovich down here busting their asses to get their ships ready. Why is it just the 3 of us? This could go much faster, because Iavaron and Linkovich didn't screw up a pitchful maneuver last season. Ravenkel strolled across the bay toward them. Still, Chief, Ryan said, disbelief on his face. That was one training run. Yeah, Gribbon called from 2 ships down. It isn't like we killed anyone. The point is, you could have, Ravenkel replied. Had we been in combat, it would have been a fatal mistake. Ryan groaned as the chief turned to Cass. Looks like you can do hard work after all. For a day at least. She paused, looking him up and down. He knew he had to look a mess. They'd been at the guts of the ships all day, and he was filthy. Commander Diazol wants to see you when you're done, in her office. Better watch out, Captain, Gribbon called. She's looking for an excuse to bust you. She's right, Ryan said. I wouldn't go up there until I was damn sure all this was perfect. He couldn't argue. His heart rate had already increased. Maybe it would be a chance for them to reset, especially after he could report success with the second set of upgrades. No doubt she knew he was still here. Otherwise, she wouldn't have told Ravenkel to relay the message. Thanks, Chief. I'll head up there when we're done here. She regarded him a moment, then left him to the job. Ryan clapped him on the back. Orders? Cass studied the line of ships. Head down to number 8 and get started. I'll help Jan with 6. You're the boss. Ryan threw the case of tools over his shoulder. 23. Evie sat at the desk in her office, attempting to review the most recent reports from Zenfor. Interpreting the complex data was like trying to read a language the universal translator couldn't understand. She set the reports aside, promising herself after a strong cup of coffee she'd come back to them again later. The last thing she wanted was to ask Zenfor to translate them for her, especially after her embarrassing behavior in the conference room. She chalked it up to pure exhaustion, or maybe it was just idiocy. Either way, it was in the past, and all she could do now was try to move forward. She stood, smoothed out her uniform, and made her way to the food dispenser in the office. She hit the program for a black coffee, and 20 seconds later, the small door opened to reveal the mug of black liquid, steaming. Blum had conferred with Sester, and they had agreed the engines needed a break. Otherwise, they'd end up burning out. which meant now, instead of sitting still, they were slowly drifting toward the center of whatever the hell this thing was. And they were still a few hours from using the space wings, at least according to Rabot's estimates from sickbay. And who knew if those were accurate or not? And Green was intent on ensuring no harm come to the creature that may or may not be pulling them to their deaths, which made sense. It was Coalition protocol, after all. But still, her stress level was through the roof. First, because of the news about her father, and now because there was no way she'd get to see him. Even if she did, it wouldn't be a pleasant trip. They had already lost a full day in this trap, and even if they broke free in the next 5 minutes, the captain wouldn't be able to justify another delay just for her. Evie took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the coffee. It was a copy of an Earth brand, though she didn't know which one. And it smelled pretty good, but nothing like the real thing. She pressed the mug to her lips, taking a brief sip, and allowing the piping liquid to coat her tongue before traveling down her throat. It was hot enough that she'd feel it for the rest of the day, but she didn't care. At this moment, she just needed something. Her comm beeped, and she set the mug down, tapping the back of her hand. Diazol. Raffenkel was on the other end. He's on his way up, ma'am. Evie glanced at the clock on her display. Already? Did he finish? He says all 9 are ready to go. Thanks, Raffenkel. I owe you one. She walked around the other side of her desk and took her chair again. Sure. I'd say you can repay me by nailing his ass to the wall, but I already know you're going to do that. Raffenkel out. The comm went silent, and Evie adjusted everything at her desk so it was in the right position. She'd had enough of this antagonism over the past few days. It was time to set things right with Cass so they could move forward. She wasn't about to spend the next 2 seasons at each other's throats. Her door chimed, and she leaned back, coffee in hand. Come in. The door slid open to reveal Cass, hair disheveled and his uniform dirty. It looked as though he'd been rolling around in the dirt. There were deep bags under his eyes, but he attempted to smile when he saw her. Thanks for coming to see me. Take a seat. She took another sip of coffee, trying to play it cool. He took the only other seat in the room, leaning back as he did, looking around. She usually didn't meet people in her office because it was technically part of her quarters, and she liked her solitude. If she needed to meet with someone, often enough she would just go to them instead. But this seemed like an occasion that called for him coming to her. This was her home turf, somewhere she could retreat without being disturbed, and because she could close off the bedroom, it wasn't as intimate as a visit to someone's personal quarters. His eyes fixated on the wall above her head, and she knew without looking he was staring at her sword, the one she'd used to save his life back in Jatan, the one she'd almost wanted to use on him for trying to run again. He looked as exhausted as she felt, but she wasn't going to make the first move. Instead, Evie sat back and took another sip of coffee, her eyes never leaving him. Cass reached for the classes orb on her desk, which was the object closest to him. How do these not fall off during the vibration? Commander, she said curtly, causing him to retract his hand. Do you have something to report? Yeah, He ran his hand down his face, wiping it on his pants. The space wings are ready, we think. Zenfor is doing some last-minute calculations. She was supposed to send you an update. I got it. Yeah. So we think everything should be ready. I just spent the last 10 hours down there with them, getting everything set up. But you already knew that. She did. She'd been keeping close tabs on him ever since he'd left sickbay. Because she'd already decided if he made one more infraction, she was relieving him of duty. She didn't care if it was harsh or not. But this man had been out of the Coalition for over 7 years, wasn't familiar with new rules and regulations, and up until very recently had professed a palpable distaste for the organization he now served. And in her eyes, it had made him untrustworthy. At least when he'd been a criminal on the run, she knew where he stood. But now, it was as if all his allegiances were shifted, and she didn't know if she could trust him anymore. Which was funny, since she'd been the one who originally considered recommending to the Admiral they reinstate him after his excellent performance in Sill Space. She guessed it was true what they say. Be careful what you wish for. You originally projected 12 hours, yet you finished in 10. Does that mean you cut corners? She asked, then took another sip. No. You know I wouldn't do that. My estimates were conservative, and I was able to motivate both Zenfor and the team to finish the work faster. I know we're on a tight timetable here. Every hour we spend is an hour closer to the center of that thing, and I don't want to see what's in there any more than anyone else. Okay, he was trying. That was a good sign. He didn't seem to be holding her dressing down of him in sickbay against her. This felt more normal. By the way, I wanted to let you know the 3 pilots Raffinkel has out there doing shit duty, Ryant, Gribbon, and Jan, all hard workers. I'm not sure what the chief's problem is, but they did a great job. In case you wanted to, note it or something. Evie set her mug down to the desk, where it automatically mag-locked, along with everything else. She chose them because they were the only 3 pilots who were willing to work with you. The other 8 refused. Oh, Cass said, pulling back. That makes sense. That had injured him. He was in an odd place. He had authority over most of the crew, yet many of them hadn't learned to accept him yet. And she suspected many wouldn't get there, ever. Reputations were a difficult thing to alter, especially when they were as strong as his. I'll make sure to let Chief Raffinkel know anyway, Evie said, trying to extend an olive branch. She had to remind herself she'd brought him here so they could reset, not so she could hurl clandestine insults at him. They were making some progress. Now, if he would just apologize for his earlier behavior. That's all it would take. She had told herself she wasn't mad at him for not finishing the anti-grav adjustments in time for her to make the report to Green. But in all honesty, she couldn't help herself. He potentially compromised the ship because of his selfish behavior. It didn't matter that it turned out more work on the ships needed to be done. Evie should have been able to report to Green in that moment. They had a backup plan ready to execute. It had been his fault they weren't ready. But it had been hers as well. She should have been keeping a closer eye on him, making sure he followed his orders. She was used to doing that with ensigns and new crewmen who transferred over, making sure they fit in with the rest of the crew. So why hadn't she done it for him? Because he was a lieutenant commander now, and she thought he should know better? Or had she not wanted to micromanage a friend? She'd trusted he could handle it, and it had turned out that trust had been misplaced. Was there anything else? Cass said, rubbing the back of his neck. Something about the way he did it irked her all over again, as if he was impatient to leave, as if he had nothing else he needed to say. I don't know. You tell me. She picked up her mug again, her fingers on the handle, releasing it from the table lock. He furrowed his brow. I don't think so. Everything else should be on schedule. Nothing you want to say to me, personally? She was reaching her limit. Even this was more of a chance than she should give him. I'm almost afraid to ask, he said with that trademark smirk. Did he think this was a joke? Never mind. We're done. You're dismissed. She turned back to her monitor, hoping he would just leave. He stood. Evie, what's going on? You've been acting strange ever since we left 8. I don't know if it's you, she said, turning back to him, doing her best to keep her temper in check. You and this little crusade you decided to embark on. You don't fit in this world anymore, something that's becoming more obvious by the day. Is this because you feel like I'm intruding on your perfect coalition? He asked, sarcasm in his voice. You don't like the fact that someone who was ostracized can just come back in? Let me remind you, it's your system. I wasn't the one who wrote the rules on coalition. Don't you dare talk about rules to me. Not after all your professions of the coalition being an evil empire bent on destroying the lives of its citizens. She could barely hold her temper. If he didn't leave right now, she was going to cold-cock him. I see. So it's about pride. You don't think someone like me should be in the coalition. I've been too tainted. He took a step back toward the door. She stood. I didn't say that. It's easy enough to tell what you're thinking. Don't worry. I will stay out of your way. Why don't I just report to Sester from now on? It will make things easier on both of us. Cass, that's not... Fine. Whatever. She placed her hands on her desk, hunching over it and rubbing her temples. A headache was coming on. Fine, he said, and the door slid closed behind him. She wanted to scream in frustration, but found she didn't have the energy. 24. An hour after his appointment with Evie, and he'd had a chance to shower, Cass stepped back onto Tempest's bridge. He hadn't been looking forward to coming back up here for the operation, as it meant he'd have to see Evie again. But she wasn't on the bridge yet. Maybe he could keep his head down as he monitored the situation. She had said he didn't fit in this world anymore. What had she meant? The Coalition itself? Or the chain of command? Or maybe all of it? He had to admit, knowing what he knew now, working for the Coalition was harder than he'd expected. He tried to put all the things they had done to him out of his mind, but it all just kept coming back, especially every time he saw one of his fellow officers joking or laughing. Because for each laugh, there was an equal and opposite reaction somewhere else in the Coalition. Some poor soul working the mines of Cathora, struggling to breathe, or someone else accused of a crime they didn't commit. It was a completely different system than the one he'd left. No, the system was the same, but he was different. He'd just happened to see the other side of things, something most people on the ship would never experience. "Commander?" Green said from the captain's chair. "Are all the ships ready?" "Yes, sir. We're ready to give this a shot," Cass replied. "Take the specialist station with the Council. Coordinate with engineering to make sure this goes to plan. We don't need any more surprises." Cass nodded, catching Blum's eye. She winked at him before turning back to the bridge engineering station. He made his way over to Zenfor, who had crammed her large frame into the small chair. It was almost comical. "Are you comfortable?" he asked. Her knees were pressed up against the underside of the station. "Comfortable enough. I need to monitor the electromagnetic signatures so we can make adjustments if necessary. If something changes." She rolled her shoulders. "Do you think that's a possibility?" he asked. "I'd like to be prepared." Cass rounded the station and approached the wall with a backup view screen. He tapped the lower corner to gain permissions, then inputted his personal codes. "Access weapons lab data," he said, and the information she'd been working on appeared on the large screen. "This might be more comfortable." She worked her way out of the station, taking care not to hit anything. "Thank you," she said, free of the small chair. "This will be easier." Cass took the specialist station instead. This way Zenfor was right behind him, and he was looking almost directly at Blum. It would make things easier if they needed to act quickly. The hypervator doors opened again to reveal Evie, who marched past Cass and Zenfor up to her chair beside Green. "Nice of you to join us, Commander," Cass overheard Green whisper. If Evie responded, he couldn't tell what she said. "Let's get started. Bay 2, are you ready down there?" Raffinkel's face appeared on the screen, her helmet obscuring her eyes. "As we'll ever be, Captain, if that pukey engineer did his job right." The rest of the bridge crew chuckled, though Cass noticed Blum didn't laugh. Neither did Evie. "Very well. Commander?" Green said. "Space Wing Squad 1, launch on my mark," Evie said. 3, 2, mark. Cass watched the view screen as the first 5 ships shot out of Bay 2 at incredible speed, plowing into the inky blackness before them. "Squad 2, launch on my mark. 3, 2, mark." 4 more ships blasted out behind them, coming up in formation behind the initial 5. The view switched to one of the outer sensors on the side of the ship, tracking all 9 space wings. "Report," Green ordered. "I'm not detecting any drag on our ships," Raffinkel said. "Looks like they were right. Whatever has Tempest isn't going after us." Cass let out the breath he'd been holding. Up until he'd seen them flying free, there had been the chance that as soon as the ships exited Bay 2, they would have become as stuck as Tempest. Zenfor hadn't thought that would be the case, and she'd been right. Green glanced over his shoulder at Cass. "Commander, whenever you're ready." Cass's own display showed him the relative positions of all 9 wings in a 3D grid. "Space Wings, proceed to your predetermined coordinates. Once you're in position, we'll activate the system. Not a minute before. I want to make sure we get this right the first time." The acknowledgement came across his screen from all 9 ships, even Reconciling. Even if she didn't like him, at least she was a professional. All the ships broke formation and took up different positions around Tempest. Zenfor said they should each be right in the path of all 9 bands pulling the ship toward the center. They'd have to make small adjustments on the fly, as Tempest was slowly moving, but it wasn't a fast rate of speed and nothing they couldn't handle. Cass took special note of where Ryant, Griffin, and Jan were positioned. Silently, he wished them luck. "All ships are in position, sir," Cass said. He glanced at Blum, who nodded, then turned and looked back at Zenfor. "Everything okay?" "Nothing's changed," the SEAL replied. "Proceed," Green said, his eyes glued to the screen. "Space Wings, activate electromagnetic signatures now." Cass held his breath. "I can report one of the bands has dissipated," Zenfor said. "Confirmed," Blum said. "The rate at which we're being pulled has slowed by a small margin." 2 strands, Zenfor said. Cass turned in his seat to watch her screen. It was difficult to tell exactly what was happening, as it was mostly SIL glyphs, but there was a graphic interface in the center representing 9 solid lines. 3 are down. Just as Cass turned back to his station with a smile on his face, the ship shook violently, almost throwing him from his chair. "Report!" Green yelled. "We are being drawn back in, sir," Blum said, holding on to her own station. Her eyes met Cass's for a second before turning away. "Our speed toward the center is increasing." "Council?" Green asked. Cass turned to see Zenfor on the floor. He vaulted his station and helped her up, back to where she could tap on some controls on her screen. "Another larger strand has appeared in place of the 3 we disrupted," she said, pulling away from him. The ship shook again. "A second strand has appeared. We need to reroute the Space Wings." "On it." Cass returned to his station. "Linkovich, Blackfield, Jan, move to new coordinates. Sending them over now." "Confirmed," the 3 pilots said at once. "What's the engine status?" Evie asked. "Near our limits," Blum replied. She tapped her own comm. "Sester? Are you seeing what we're seeing here?" "He is, Commander," Tyler's voice replied on the other end. "We're working on giving you more thrust." "We need to disrupt the rest of those things all at once," Cass said. "Can we do it?" Zenfor turned to him. "I don't know. They all activated their signatures at the same time. They should have disrupted the bands at the same time, not one at a time." The ship shook again. "Another new band has a hold on us. The Space Wings are having no effect on the new, larger bands, only the smaller ones. 7 have been cut." "How do we cut these new ones?" Green yelled. "Griffin, Reconciling, rendezvous at these coordinates," Cass said, inputting directions for the same place. "Let's see if 2 ships can't disrupt a larger band." "They need new signatures. One moment." Zenfor worked on her board, quick, then hit the transmit button. "Chief? Captain? Use the new signatures to disrupt this band." Both pilots confirmed the order. "Is it working?" Green asked. "Yes, the band is weakening," Zenfor replied. "Caspian, tell the other Space Wings to converge on these larger bands." "You got it." Cass sent the orders to the other 7 pilots. The last of the smaller bands had just been destroyed. The ship shook again. "Another band?" Green asked. "No, the band the other ships were headed for disappeared," Zenfor said, confusion in her voice. "It's reappeared on the other side of the ship. Send them over there." Cass worked as fast as he could to relay the new set of coordinates. "Commander, another band has disappeared, and now reappeared somewhere else. It is as if someone knows what the fighters are doing and is trying to keep them from interacting with it." Zenfor worked furiously, trying to keep up. "Send them over there," Green said. "I'm on it," Cass yelled. It seemed as soon as he was done telling the ships where to go, the band would move. Could that indicate intelligence? I think it's anticipating our moves, sir. The band had moved positions again, just as he'd sent the ships to the new coordinates. Tempest was too large. They couldn't get to where they needed to go quickly enough before the band would change positions. The Space Wings are reporting they're getting sluggish out there, Blum said. The electromagnetic field around the entire ship has increased in strength, Zenfor replied. It is starting to affect their ships. Is there any hope of salvaging this? Green asked. I don't see how, sir. Not unless we have enough Space Wings to coat the entire outside of Tempest. Cass gritted his teeth at his own monitor. Whatever this thing out there was, it was actively working against them. Call them back. Get them in the hangar before they get stuck out there, Green ordered. All Space Wing fighters return to Bay 2. Repeat, abort mission, return to Bay 2, Cass said. Once all the ships were safely back in the bay, he glanced up at Blum, whose face was on her own controls. How bad is it? We're being pulled in at almost 10 times the previous rate, she replied. How long does that give us? Green asked. 8 hours, if the engines hold out, she replied. But there's a possibility we'll burn them out, just trying to stay at this speed. And the fleet is still 9 days away, Zal said from Ops. We couldn't wait for them now if we wanted to. Cass turned to Zenfor. What are you seeing? He asked. She studied the glyphs on her screen for a moment, seeming to consider her next words. We're now being held by 4 larger, stronger strands, and they are pulling us in, closer to the center and closer to the creature. I fear we may have underestimated whatever sits at the center of this phenomena. I no longer believe this area of space is naturally occurring. Then what is it? Cass asked. A trap. 25. A trap. It was like a punch in the gut. Now they had undeniable proof the creature was intelligent, that it wasn't just working off some kind of instinct. And Cass's first thought was they needed to blow it out of the sky using every weapon they had. But then his meeting with Evie flashed in his mind. You don't fit in this world. Was destroying the creature what a coalition officer would do? It's what Rutledge would have done. But was it the right call? Chief Raffenkel, please report to the bridge ASAP, Green said into his comm. He turned to Cass and Zenfor. What happened? It seems the creature began anticipating our moves and took actions to prevent us from breaking the ship free, Zenfor said. She was calm and measured, an antithesis to the panic Cass was keeping veiled. He'd been rattled. He didn't like how fast the creature had adapted to their countermeasures. It knew it wanted Tempest for whatever reason. But did it even know what Tempest was? This must have been what happened to the Iphigenia, Cass said. And the Genesis. I believe they both fell into the same area of space and were pulled in by the creature. And then what? Green asked. It was a fair question. Without any debris or evidence the ships had been destroyed, there was no telling what happened to them once they reached the center of this area of space. Were they disintegrated? Pulled into the other pocket dimension? I'm not sure. Cass motioned to Zal. Are we still receiving the distress signal from Iphigenia? Zal shook his head. No. It cut off. He tapped a few buttons. As soon as the Space Wings engaged their electromagnetic fields. Perhaps the use of the fields disrupted the distress signal. But we're no longer receiving any transmissions. Green turned to his ops officer. Is there any chance we could call for help from someone else? Someone closer? I don't think so, sir. We're deep within Coalition territory. If there are any non-Coalition ships in this area, we probably don't want them stopping by. Cass knew what he meant. Pirates, spies, and subterfuge vessels from either the Sargan Commonwealth or one of the non-aligned worlds. Even though this was Coalition-held territory, it wasn't as if the Coalition could patrol their massive swaths of territory all the time. Ships slipped through. Cass knew from experience there were at least a dozen smuggling operations on Coalition worlds operated by the Sargan Commonwealth. He hadn't heard of any that went this far into Coalition-held space. But then again, Vina hadn't made him privy to everything. He should have anticipated the creature's intelligence. They should have had a backup plan in place. But he'd been so sure this could work because he trusted Zenfor's calculations. She had experience with multidimensional fields and beings. He naturally assumed her plan would be successful. But in the end, it wasn't her responsibility to see this thing through. Despite Zenfor's discoveries, this had been his mission. The success or failure fell on his shoulders alone, and he let the rest of the crew down. He had no one to blame but himself. And it was an odd sensation. He wasn't used to failing as an officer. Why had he thought things would be different once he put the uniform on again? He was still the same fallible human, whether he wore it or not. The hypervator doors opened, and Reconciling stormed in, helmet still in her hand, and connected to her flight suit. Her face was covered in perspiration. "What the hell was that out there?" she demanded, staring at Cass. "The creature countered everything we were doing," he replied. "It's intelligent." "For fuck's sake," she replied. "That would have been helpful to know before I risked 8 of my pilots." Her breathing was labored, as if she'd run to the bridge instead of taking the hypervators. "We didn't know. If we had, we'd—" He glanced over at Zenfor. "We probably still would have tried." "Pilots' lives are cheap, is that it?" She took a few steps closer to him, her free hand clenched in a fist. "That's enough, Chief. I didn't ask you up here to argue. What did you see out there? Full report," Green said. She made a noise deep in her throat and turned away from Cass. "Everything started out fine. The anti-grav systems the robot installed worked well enough. I couldn't feel any drag on the ship at all. But the longer we were out there, the more sluggish the controls became. It started out small, but by the end we were having a hard time getting them to respond correctly. As soon as we got back in the bay, all the problems disappeared." "The creature seems to have increased the force of the electromagnetic field outside the ship," Zenfor said. "It would have made it more difficult to maneuver." "Then I guess that was it," Reconciling spat. "Chief, was there anything else?" the captain asked. She regained a grip on her helmet, which had begun to slip from her hand. "Yeah. I don't normally go for frou-frou stuff, but something weird is going on out there. I talked to Saturina and Alec, and they both said the same thing. It's like we could feel the ambush coming. It was like there was a presence standing over our shoulders, watching us. I don't know what that thing is, but we need to do whatever is necessary to get the ship away from it, right now. I don't care if you have to blow it to hell and back. Just get us away from it." Green screwed up his face. "I don't understand. You felt it? You want me to take you out there? You can feel it for yourself if you like," she yelled. "Chief Reconciling," Evie interjected, "compose yourself. You're addressing a captain of the Coalition Navy." Reconciling averted her eyes a moment and took a deep breath, composing herself. "Sorry, sir. It's just, do whatever it takes to get us away." "It's okay, Chief. I understand that can't have been an easy mission. But just know that no one here tried to blindside you. Sometimes we don't know exactly what we're headed into, even if we think we do." She nodded. "Are all your pilots all right?" "Some are a little shaken up, but they'll be fine. They've been through tougher than this. I have faith in my team. If you need us to go back out there," Green glanced at Cass, "I don't think that will be productive at this time, but thank you for volunteering. I'll take it under advisement. You're dismissed." Reconciling left the bridge, and Cass was struck at just how rattled she'd seemed. Had it really been that strange out there? He had a strange desire to experience it for himself. What was this creature? And was it possible for them to communicate with it? If he tried that in the beginning instead of agreeing to go along with a Space Wing plan, would they be free right now? He needed some time to think, and to find a way to speak with this thing. He needed to review Zenfor's sensor recordings of what happened to Iphigenia and Genesis. They might give him some more insight into what to do. "Commander? Keep us at this speed for as long as possible," Green said to Blum. "Coordinate with engineering to see if there's anything you can do to give us a stay of execution." He turned to Evie. "In the meantime, begin drawing up a battle plan. We may have no choice but to destroy the creature." Evie nodded and returned to her station. "Captain," Cass said, stepping forward, "there may be another way." He shot Zenfor a quick glance, but her attention remained trained on her board, studying the information coming in. "I'm listening, Commander," Green said, impatience tinging his voice. "If we know this creature is intelligent, perhaps we can reason with it. It may not understand that we're sentient beings as well. And if we can find a dialogue, we might be able to negotiate our own release without harming it." Evie, her previous task forgotten, turned to face him, suspicion in her eyes. He didn't return the favor. "What makes you think communication is even possible?" Green asked. "I'm not sure yet, sir, but this creature must have some awareness of us. I think by studying the information on the Iphigenia and Genesis, I might be able to find something." This was the right call, right? Wasn't this what he would have done back on Aklis? The Coalition was sworn to protect life, and this creature might not be malicious at all. They just had to try harder. "You realize we don't have the luxury of time," Green began. "How long would you need before you could come up with something? Days? Weeks?" "Sir, Box is more capable than any other person I've ever known at interpreting language, whether it be spoken or something completely different. Let me work with him at the Council. I believe between the three of us we can come up with a solution." Zenfor scoffed, having finally turned to face him. "It is a fool's errand." Green turned to her. "You don't think a solution can be found?" "I think you will end up wasting your time, and by the time you realize the truth, it will be too late. Something like this can't be reasoned with. You should destroy the creature and continue on your mission. It's more important." She crossed her arms, leaning back against the display. "Are you saying diplomacy is pointless?" Cass challenged. "In this case, yes. You can't reason with everything. Not everyone can be convinced of your goodness." She scowled at him. "It worked on you," he said, before realizing what had come out of his mouth. A white-hot pain exploded on his temple, and he was on the ground, not remembering the fall itself. He glanced up through fuzzy vision to see Zenfor standing over him, seething. "Nothing worked on me," she said. "I am on this ship because a threat to my people is out there, and you are nothing more than a courier taking me to my destination. I don't care about your coalition or your ideals or even your people. All I care about is stopping a threat before it reaches my home. So don't tell me diplomacy worked on me when you have done nothing to prove yourselves worthy of my attention." She stormed off the bridge, not looking back as the hypervator doors closed behind her. "Lieutenant? Send a security team for the Council. Remand her to the brig," Green said. "Aye," Uma replied. Strong arms grabbed Cass and helped hoist him up. He expected to see Evie, but was surprised it was Commander Blum instead. "Are you okay?" she asked. He shook his head. The blood running through his veins throbbed all over. Rubbing the spot where Zenfor had socked him, he smirked. "I've seen worse, thanks." She lingered a moment until he had his footing before stepping back. Cass turned to Green. "Don't throw Zenfor in the brig. She attacked you. That's a punishable offense on this ship, Commander. I don't care what species she is." "Yes, sir. But that was my fault, not hers. If you contain her in the brig, she'll never help us again. Confine her to quarters if you have to, but don't throw her in jail. It won't go well, I promise you." Green turned to his XO. "Commander, you've worked with her more than I have. Your thoughts?" Evie stared at Cass a moment, searching for something in his eyes. He wasn't sure if she saw it or not. "I agree with Commander Rabot. If we want her help, we can't antagonize her further." Green sighed. "Lieutenant Uma, make sure the Council returns to her quarters, and if she attempts to leave again, notify me immediately." "Yes, sir," Uma said, tapping her control board a few times. She turned and left the bridge, presumably to keep tabs on Zenfor. The other set of hypervator doors opened, and Ensign Yamashita took up the tactical station. Cass didn't miss a quick glance between her and Evie. "Get yourself to sickbay to check that out," Green said. "Then get started on your research. You have 2 hours." Cass nodded, grateful for the captain's faith in him. Green didn't want to destroy this creature if he could help it. At least Cass knew he was still one of the purists and hadn't been infected by whatever was happening at the Coalition. Rutledge would have destroyed the creature as soon as they found it. But this was promising. Cass made his way to the hypervator, praying he could find a solution. 26. Evie couldn't believe what she'd witnessed. Xenfor had calmly approached Cass, she wasn't even sure he saw it coming, and decked him, sending him at least a meter sideways before he fell. She had jumped up, but Green held her back. By the time the sill had left the bridge, Evie's breathing had slowed, and she was finally able to take stock of the situation. The fact was, she agreed with Xenfor. She didn't think they could communicate with this creature, and they were delaying the inevitable. And it took her a minute to figure out why Cass had even suggested it. He was trying to be a better officer. She'd given him so much grief about taking his old rank back, and now he was trying to fold himself back into that role, to become the man he used to be. Evie had no doubt at one time he would have done anything to protect this life form. But she wasn't so sure that was him anymore. She couldn't help but feel the slightest twinge of shame he was willing to go the extra mile to protect this creature when even she wasn't. Thankfully, he'd already left the bridge. "Commander, I want you to coordinate with Rabot on his progress. Keep me updated. If it looks like it's not going anywhere, I need to know. I'm not prepared to waste time on a venture that won't help the situation." She hesitated. "Yes, sir. I'll get right on it as soon as... I know you and he are having personal issues, but I need you to put those aside," Green said, in a voice low enough no one else could hear him. "Get the job done, Commander." "Yes, sir." Evie stood and walked over to the tactical station, where Laura was running through her pre-checks. "Is Consul Xenfor headed back to her quarters?" "I just got an update from Lieutenant Uma," Laura replied. "She's trailing her, and she seems to be heading there now. She'll update us if Xenfor changes course. The sooner she's back in her own room, the better I'll feel," Evie said. "What happened?" Laura whispered. "Why is she under surveillance?" Evie surveyed the bridge. No one paid them any attention. Blum had returned to her station, and the captain was speaking to Zal about something. Rond and River's attentions were focused on the screen in front of them. "She hit Caspian. He never saw it coming." Laura's mouth went agape. "No way." Evie nodded. "Swear to Cor." "I'm not even sure I understand why, but I think he insulted her." She shook her head. "But it was clear from the look on his face he knew he'd screwed up. I'm surprised the captain didn't throw her in the brig." Laura tapped a few buttons on her console, though Evie knew they were dummy switches that did nothing other than display ship information. "He tried, but Cass objected. Said throwing her in there would only make things worse." "Whew," Laura replied, keeping her eyes down. "I feel sorry for him. He's been through a lot." Evie scoffed. "If there's one thing that man doesn't need, it's pity. He's fine." She looked over to see Blum eye her for a moment, then turn away. "I don't know. Can you imagine trying to come back into the same organization that betrayed you? I wouldn't be able to do it." Evie leaned closer. "It's not doing him any favors. I don't even know why he's wasting his time." She paused. "Well, if it were me, I'd want to recapture what I'd lost. He's probably trying to figure out how to fit back in after so much time away. But not everyone can fit back in." Laura sat back. "I guess not. Either way, it sounds pretty lonely." Evie straightened her back, sneaking another glance at the hypervator. "Yeah, it does." "You want me to do what?" Box asked as they made their way down the corridor. Cass had made a quick stop to sickbay, where Zax had provided some pressure therapy to his temple to reduce the chances of swelling. If it felt worse, he was to report back. He was getting sick of leaving sickbay with warnings to return if anything went wrong. He'd made it 2 years without seeing a doctor. But ever since coming back to the Coalition, it was like he found himself back in sickbay on a weekly basis. Fortunately, Zax had allowed him to borrow Box for a few hours. I need you to help me analyze the scans we took of the past, to see if we can find any way to communicate with this fucking thing that's trying to kill us. And why don't we just let the captain shoot it? Because that's not what the Coalition does, Cass replied, frustrated. No, they only falsely accuse and try their officers, then sentence them to die working the Cyclax mines. I wasn't sentenced to die, Cass replied. Oh, excuse me. So working on a planet where you couldn't breathe the atmosphere, and where the dust was toxic once it got into your system, was good for your health, was it? He'd lapsed back into one of his old accents. Cass hadn't heard him do that since Devil's Gate. He glanced up at the robot. What's wrong with you? This crusade you're on is going to kill us all, and you can't even see it, he said in his normal voice. That's not what this is. Just help me figure this out, and if it doesn't work, the captain can blow the thing to kingdom come, okay? Box mimicked a sigh, though he had no lungs or mouth to produce the real sound. Fine. Lead the way. Then, after a pause, should we gather the council? Cass rubbed his temple again. Let's give her some time to cool off. What did you say to piss her off anyway? Box asked as they stepped into the hypervator. I implied we were superior diplomats. He shook his head. He should have known better. But it had been a slip of the tongue. Senfor wasn't the kind of person you belittled, and that had been just what he'd done, in front of the entire bridge crew. It was the second time she'd hit him, though he couldn't tell which had been worse. But he figured he was the last person she wanted to see at the moment. They made their way back into the weapons lab, where, thanks to Cass's limited knowledge of the system, he was able to access the scans using the SIL timestamp. So you're telling me she recorded these events in real time? From the light hundreds of light years away? 27 light years to be precise, Cass said. And 54 in this case. He tapped the screen, bringing the scans back up. Let's focus on Iphigenia. The scans from Genesis aren't very clear. Cass brought up the visual, as well as the spectrum scans. They couldn't see the creature on the visual scans, as everything was dark, but the other screen was lit up with radiation across the spectrum. What is this? Box asked, pointing to one of the levels. Something called cryon radiation. Ever heard of it? No. Neither has anyone outside of SIL space. I'm not even sure we have the capability to detect it. He leaned into the spectrum screen. Iphigenia was running hot, her engines firing on all cylinders to keep her out of the center of the phenomenon. Did they know about the creature? Or had they seen something else? The creature is emitting a lot of it, Box said. It's coming off in waves, like pulses almost. Cass turned to him. Do you see a pattern? Speed it up. Let me see the entire scan. Cass worked the controls, and the images moved to 100 times speed. He watched as the Iphigenia was slowly pulled into the center of the field, and then slowly disappeared from the visual screen. He checked the spectrum screen, and the outline of the ship was still visible. But it was like it had been absorbed into the darkness on the visual screen. What is happening here? I don't know, but I'm seeing something in this radiation, Box replied. It has something of a structure to it. I think there might be something here. On the visual screen, there was a flash of light, and on the corresponding spectrum screen, all the feeds died, the entire area resorting to nothing but background radiation. What happened? I don't know. Cass rewound the feed. The levels rose slightly, then the flash again, and everything was back. The spectrum screen dancing with activity. I wonder if somehow the Iphigenia found a way to seal the disruption in space, but they had to wait until they were inside to do it. Maybe you should tell the captain to send one of these probes into the disturbance itself. We might be able to see what they were seeing. Box's eyes blinked rapidly. What about the radiation? Do you think there's something you can work with? Box nodded. Definitely. Give me a few minutes to build a syntax. But if there's a way to seal the creature back, diplomacy first, Box. Then we consider sending it back to its dimensional tomb. This can work. We just need to give it a chance. He wasn't about to do something drastic until they fully understood the risks. What if this creature spent all those years trapped, only to find escape, and it needed help? Or maybe Iphigenia was still stuck in there somewhere. even though the current scan showed no evidence of it anywhere. That distress signal had come from somewhere. "That flash at the end. Show me that again," Box said. Cass fast-forwarded the screens again, pausing right on the flash itself. "Run it back slow." He did, and saw what Box was looking for. There were intermittent pulses inside the light flash as well. Complex ones running for milliseconds before disappearing. "Is this part of it?" "I don't know," Box replied. "Maybe. But there's enough it might indicate some sort of secondary communication attempt. A short one. Like a call for help?" "Or a scream," Box replied. 27. Cass and Box stood in the command room, with Evie and Captain Green sharing the other side of the desk. No one had sat down. "You must be confident, Mr. Rabot. I gave you 2 hours, and you didn't even take one." Green stared at the information they transferred to his desk. "Commander, have you taken a look at this?" Cass cast his eyes at Evie, worried she was about to shoot this down before even giving it a chance. But instead, she nodded. "The commander and Mr. Box brought it to me as soon as they had the basic language set up." Cass noticed Box's eyes blink with admiration at his new title. He'd been hearing about that for a week now. "It seems viable. Better than anything else we have at the moment. If you want a solution that doesn't kill the thing, this is it." Green studied the screen for a minute. "So how do you want to go about this?" Cass leaned forward. 2 shuttles. We'll have to affix them with the enhanced anti-grav modifications so we can get them out of Bay 1. One will be equipped to transmit the radiation signals, the other the visual signals. At least hopefully, this way the creature will respond to one of the 2 forms of communication. Whichever it responds to, that shuttle transmits our intentions and begins a dialogue. If all goes well, the creature releases Tempest. "And if all doesn't go well?" Evie asked. "Send one of Zenfor's probes into the tear into the other dimension. We believe after the Iphigenia entered the tear, it found a way to seal itself in the creature inside, if they were even aware of the creature. If the probe can determine the same solution, we can use it to seal things back up in the event the communication doesn't work." Green stared even harder at the screens. "How confident are you the probe will be able to find a way to seal the creature back inside?" Cass sighed. "I'll admit, it's conjecture, sir. The scans from Iphigenia were limited, as were the ones from Genesis. But we saw a similar pattern with both ships. They did exactly what we're doing now, and we're still pulled in. There's nothing to say our weapons will have any effect on the creature. It emits this cryon radiation. Yes, I see it here. We can adjust the output of our engines to emit something very similar, but we can't copy it exactly. But, sir, Consul Zenfor was the one who discovered it. Without her, we wouldn't even know what to look for." "You want her to be on one of the shuttles," Green said, leaning back in his chair. "I feel like it's appropriate. She's had experience with phenomenon like this before. If something goes wrong, I'd rather have her there than not." "And if she's unwilling to go?" "She doesn't seem too pleased with you at the moment." "We'll have to do it without her. But like I said, I'd rather not." Green tapped the screen, shutting it down. "I have to tell you, Commander, I'm not thrilled with this idea. There are a lot of unknowns here, and I don't like risking my crew." Cass stood his ground, his hands clasped behind him. "I understand, sir. But the other option is to try and kill the creature, which you expressly said you didn't want to do." Finally, this felt right. "I have to agree with him, sir," Evie added, causing Cass to shoot her a look. She agreed with him? "If we mean to stand by our ideals and uphold the tenets of the Coalition, it's our duty to do everything to our ability to communicate with the creature before destroying it. The Commander and Mr. Box have given us that ability. I believe it's worth a shot." Green stared at Cass and Box a moment longer. "I want you to have an escort. I'm not sending 2 shuttles out there without backup. Sir, if we send the space wings again, the creature might interpret it as hostile. We could—" Green held up his hand. "I need to know you will have protection while you're out there. If one of the shuttles is disabled, The space wings can tow them back to the bay a lot easier than the other shuttle could. And if you're planning on using any of the space wing pilots for the shuttles, then I'm confident Reconciling will agree with me. We have one pilot covered, sir, Box stated. Cass stared at him. They hadn't even discussed crew assignments for the mission yet. You're volunteering? Green asked. I am. Commander Rabot will tell you I'm an excellent pilot. Cass leaned in. It's true. He could park a Mark 8 Starhopper like no one else I've ever seen. You continue to surprise me, Mr. Box. Zax tells me your work down in sickbay has been exemplary, Green said. Thanks. Cass shot him a look. Sir? Okay, Rabot. We're giving this a shot. Coordinate with Diazol to get your shuttle crews assigned and get working on those upgrades immediately. How long do you estimate before you can launch? The modifications on the shuttle shouldn't take as long as the space wings. They're more robust systems. Another hour, tops. Green nodded. Very well. And if you decide to take Consul Zenfor, she will be your responsibility. I'll need your word you'll keep her in line, and her fists away from any more of my crew. Cass bristled at the phrase, keep her in line. It was exactly what she hated about the Coalition. But he didn't have much of a choice. Yes, sir. It won't be a problem. Commander? Anything else to add? Green said, turning to Evie. Yeah. Good work, she said, the hint of a smile on her face. After leaving the bridge, Cass and Box had made a beeline for Bay 1, where the smaller shuttles were held. They wouldn't need one of the larger models. They should only have 3 crew per shuttle, a pilot, an engineer, and a backup in case things got hairy. But somewhere in his gut, Cass felt like this could work. It was a long shot, but he believed they could do it. I thought you were a doctor now, Cass said as he and Box entered the expansive room. Nurse, actually, Box said. It doesn't mean I don't like piloting anymore. But if you haven't noticed, those sorts of jobs are already taken on this ship. Not that I could fit in one of those space wings anyway. Speciesist contraptions. Are you sure? It could be dangerous. Box's eyes blinked in alarm. Don't you want me along? I am the best pilot you've ever known. I'd think you'd be happy. No, I am, Cass said. I just didn't want you to feel obligated because of what happened back at Quaval. Oh, you mean when you ran off without me and nearly killed someone with your subpar piloting skills? Cass scowled. Yes. I know why you did it. Box hit him on the shoulder. It was meant to be playful, but there would be a bruise tomorrow. If there was a tomorrow. You like playing the hero. No, Cass stammered. That wasn't it. I had a job to do, and everyone else was just getting in the way. Box waved him off. Whatever, hero boy. Couldn't do that now, could you? It'd be another court-martial. I guess not, Cass said. He hadn't considered it, but Box was right. If he tried anything like what he'd done before, stealing information from the ship, absconding with a shuttle, faking a core breach to get away, he'd be locked up for good. And yet, he'd done all those things. And here he was, still walking around, free. Box waved to one of the crewmen working in the bay. He was hunched over a workstation. Crewman Abernathy, your assistance, please. Abernathy glanced up. What's going on? He asked. Why did you send me all this information? We need to modify 2 shuttles, Cass said, and we don't have a lot of time. I need you to assign us a maintenance team. Box will be in charge of making the modifications. Box turned to him. Running off again? His yellow eyes blinked at their laughter pattern. I have to gather the rest of our crew, Cass replied, starting with a second pilot. No way. It's not happening, Reconciling said, staring daggers at Cass. He'd made the quick journey over from the adjacent Bay 1. Chief, they're the best pilots on the ship, and I only need one. I know they're the best pilots on the ship. I trained most of them myself. There are plenty of shuttle pilots assigned to Tempest. Pick your guinea pig from them. None of them have the same levels of experience. This isn't going to be like charting a nebula or landing on a planet. I don't know what we're going to encounter out there, and I'd much rather have someone who's already done it once." Raffinkel continued to shake her head dismissively, her short blonde hair swishing as she did. "It's not happening," Cass groaned. "Look, none of us is going to survive this if we don't give this communication a try. We need the best of the best out there. I wouldn't be asking if I thought we could do it any other way." Raffinkel narrowed her eyes. "You could order me to do it. In fact, I'm surprised you haven't already. What's your angle?" Cass couldn't help the twinge of shame bubbling up within him. "I don't want to do that again. I want this to be voluntary. I know it's risky, and I'm not willing to make someone take that chance if they don't want to." She crossed her arms. "Anything happens out there, I'm holding you responsible," she said. "Fair enough. Go. Talk to the ones already in the bay. If none says yes, I'll recall the others," she said. Some of the hardness had left her voice, but her eyes remained stern. This was not a woman Cass wanted to push to the edge. He wished he could guarantee everything would be fine. But Green was right. There were too many unknowns. It was a big risk. "Thank you," he said. He headed back out of the small office in the back of Bay 2 into the main area, where the 5 Space Wing pilots stood in various positions. Griffin and Jan were turned away from him, engaged in a private conversation. Bryant wasn't present, but 3 other pilots, Linkovich, Iavarone, and Blackfield, were each at their respective ships, performing maintenance checks. Cass had never met them in person before, only knew them from their service records. Griffin waved Cass over. "What's this I hear about a secret mission?" she asked, her eyes alight with excitement. "You heard right. I need someone to pilot one of the shuttles," Cass said. "I thought you had 2 shuttles," Jan said, regarding him. "I hope you're not the other pilot." "Very funny. Box volunteered to take the other spot, but I still need one more, and I wanted the best." "Of course you wanted the best," Griffin replied. "Saturina here would love to volunteer." "What?" Jan said, stepping back. "Maybe if I get to fly my own—" Griffin rolled her eyes. "Calm down. I'm just screwing with you. I'll do it." Cass had been distracted by their banter, and it took him a moment to realize what she'd said. "You will?" She shrugged. "Sure. I'm always up for something new. Plus, unlike this one, I'm not afraid of flying something other than my own ship." Jan frowned. "I never said—" Griffin burst into laughter. "Man, you are gullible today. Did you even have breakfast?" Jan narrowed her eyes. "This is serious, Licia. We don't know what's out there. And dogfighting Sargans isn't? Everything will be fine. And if it isn't, then it isn't. And we move on, like always." She turned to Cass. "Which way, Commander?" He regarded her. "Meet me in Bay 1 in an hour. We're still upgrading the shuttles." She shot him a wink and a thumbs up. He turned to leave, but stopped short of the door. "And Captain Griffin? Thank you." 28. Cass approached the door to Zenfor's quarters, rubbing the back of his neck over and over. He wasn't looking forward to this. His temple hadn't swollen up much, but it still hurt. Touching the wound with his hand caused a sharp bolt of pain to shoot through his head. But he couldn't blame her. He should have known better. And there was no telling if she'd agree to help them anymore. The crew hadn't been welcoming to her and Cass. Despite all his authority, it hadn't made the situation much better. He pressed the small button on the side of the door. There was no answer. He pressed it again, wondering if she had disabled it. He was about to press it a 3rd time when the door slid open to reveal Zenfor, standing before him wearing her biosuit again, sans helmet. Upon seeing his face, she grimaced, then stumped back into her room. She hadn't shut the doors on him. "Does that mean I can come in?" he asked. "I suppose you want an apology." She'd crossed her arms and stared out the window. "No. You weren't in the wrong. Well, you're not supposed to assault people. But it was my careless words that spurned you. I shouldn't have been so crass, and I apologize." He'd made a lot of mistakes in his time, but living among the Sargans, you learned you really didn't have to apologize for what you did. Everyone just moved on. Coming back here and being a part of this organization, it felt strange, yet familiar at the same time, to be issuing Zenfor an apology. Not that he didn't mean it. It was just strange coming from his own mouth. It even felt a little strange, a little too formal. You people are so chaotic. Half of you one way, another half the other way. And many of you can't make up your minds about the smallest of things. It's like you're perpetually stuck in a state of indecision, always 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And when you do commit to something, you often don't see the pitfalls before you until you've fallen in them. She sighed. I miss the clarity of the sill. Here I find myself so conflicted. You hit that one on the head, Cass said. Humans, and by extension the Coalition, are a work in progress. We're always trying to learn from our mistakes. She turned to him, her stare penetrating his defenses, until he had to look away. Believe it or not, I understand how you feel, living among people who are nothing like you. I've had to do it twice, and both times it was the hardest thing I've had to do, to become accustomed to. But I did it. I adapted, and you can too. I'm not like your people. I am who I am, and I can't change. You should know that about me by now. I guess I'm just an optimist that way, he shrugged. Probably the only thing I am optimistic about. She took a breath, then stiffened. Is that all you needed? To issue your apology? No. I want you to come with me to face the creature. Box and I studied your data in the weapons lab, and— You used my work? She yelled. SIL technology I specifically told you not to access? Cass didn't back off, even as she approached him. Instead, he took a step forward. We are all going to die in about 7 hours if we don't figure something out. So yes, I used your work, and I would do it again. The point is, we found a way to communicate with the creature, using your scans. I show them to no one but Box, and he can just as easily delete them as he can never speak of them again. But we wouldn't know what we were doing if we didn't have the information. Zenfor had stopped close to him, gritting her teeth, and trying to intimidate him with her size. But she wasn't going to get away with it. Not this time. How? She spat. One of 2 ways. Or maybe a combination of both. We don't know yet. Box derived a language to try for the cryon radiation your sensors picked up, as well as the light pattern of the scans from when the Iphigenia vanished off sensors. One of the 2 should at least let us talk to it. Let it know living sentient beings are on the ship it is trapped. And if it doesn't care? We'll have no choice but to destroy it. She chuckled, folding her arms across her chest again. And you want me to come with you? Since you're the only one who can use her technology, I need you to come with us and monitor the creature's reactions to the radiation and the light patterns. See if either has any kind of effect. Unless you want me trying to translate what all your glyphs and symbols mean. How will you use the radiation? I spoke with Commander Sester. Upon learning about cryon radiation, he thinks he's devised a way for the shuttle engines to send out similar, if not exact, signals. Close enough so it should at least get the creature's attention. Let it know we're trying to communicate in a way, that we're intelligent. That is still up for debate, she replied, her nostrils flaring. Look, I understand we are inferior to you, but we are trying. And if you help us, there's a much greater chance this will succeed. You are the only person on board who has any experience with multiple dimension beings, since you are one yourself. To not have you along would be reckless. Cass was becoming exasperated. How much did she want from him? Or was this the price he had to pay for insulting her? Her face relaxed. She reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, just as she had done that very first time they'd met on her ship, when he'd been her prisoner. You are determined. I'll give you that much. Very well. If I am to die today, I may as well be a willing participant than just sitting back and waiting for it to happen. That's not what I meant, but make no mistake. This is a fool's errand. We will likely perish. There wasn't a crack in her visage, a hint of any humor in her voice. Okay, fair enough. I'll be operating the pattern on one of the shuttles, but we need someone else for the other shuttle. Any ideas? Ensign Tyler seems like a passable candidate, she replied. I didn't think you liked him. I don't. He's arrogant, and he has a lot of deep-seated insecurities, but he's capable and can get the job done. Cass's eyes widened. Were they that transparent to her? Perhaps the Sill were better attuned to pick up on the small, unspoken language people emoted every day. He returned his attention to Zenfor. Is that how you see all of us? Or just Tyler? She didn't respond. You know, there's something I've been wondering. Your goodbye ceremony with Meless was the only time I've ever heard you sing. But it sounded like there was a great deal of pain in there. Are all Sill goodbye ceremonies that emotional? Her eyes flashed. I told you, we are a social species. We require the company of others. Saying goodbye is difficult. Cass pitied her. Not because she was pitiable, but because the situation had taken her from those she loved. It was a situation he knew all too well. We're not that different. Humans need each other too. Maybe not in the same way, but we are desperately sad when someone we care about leaves us, whether that is because they have died or are no longer in our lives. And it takes us a long time to mourn. Often we never get over it. Not really. Your point? You're not alone here. Even if you feel like you are, it's because you're not seeing us as anything but ants. Look past our flaws. We are people just like you, and we need each other just like you. You don't have to be alone on this ship. I'm not saying we will ever be a substitute for your people, but while you are here, you don't have to feel so cut off. You don't have to isolate yourself. She drew a long breath in through her nose, the sparkles in her gray eyes glittering back at him. When do we leave? She asked. He huffed. He thought he'd actually made some progress. Maybe it would take time. If they succeeded, she might come around one day. 45 minutes. I'll need to talk to Tyler. Cass's comm beeped. He tapped it. Rabot. It's Evie. Meet me in Bay 1 as soon as you're ready to go over the details. He was surprised. The scorn in her voice from before was gone. What had changed? Acknowledged, he said. Can you also ask Ensign Tyler to meet us there? The Council suggested he might be a good fit for the crew. I'll speak to him, Evie replied. Diazol out. Cass tapped the comm again, turning it off. The commander approves of your plan, Zenfor said. And she's been upset with you for some time. Yeah, Cass said, staring at the small implant at the back of his hand. I noticed that too. Maybe you're right, Zenfor said. Maybe my interactions with the crew haven't been entirely their fault. I'll attempt to adjust. Make no mistake, Cass said, his attention back on her. I don't want you to change. I want you to manage your expectations of us and be open to possibilities. We'll see. That was the best he could hope for. Cass led the way out of her room, with them walking down the wide corridor. From behind Cass, he heard someone running to catch up. He turned to see crewman Wells jogging behind them. Wells, what's going on? Wells stopped and took a breath, straightening his security uniform. He was out of breath. Lieutenant said if the Council left her room to follow. Right. She had assaulted Cass. Green didn't want her going anywhere on the ship without an escort or a guard. It's okay, Wells. I'm with her. You sure? I can... Are you deaf? Zenfor said. I don't need you to babysit me. She stopped, closed her eyes for a moment, then reopened them, forcing a smile on her face. You were just doing your duty. Good for you, crewman. Wells looked perplexed, his face contorted with confusion. Thanks? Report back to Lieutenant Uma. I'm sure she's got another assignment for you, Cass said. Right, Wells replied, having caught his breath. Right, thank you, sir. He turned and jogged off the way he'd come, while Cass turned to look at Zenfor. She shot him a quick look, then returned to her course, headed back toward the bays. Maybe it wouldn't take so long after all. 29. Evie watched Box work with the maintenance team on the shuttles, directing both of them at once. It was amazing to see an artificial life form in control of both these teams, and all of them working efficiently. He would check on their progress and show them if they were headed in the wrong direction before they could cock it all up. Was there anything he wasn't good at? "You called for me, Commander?" Evie turned to see Ensign Tyler, immaculate as always. It wasn't often she interacted with him, as her liaison was Commander Blum, but she'd had the odd encounter once or twice. "Do you know about the mission to the center of the phenomenon?" she asked. "To where the creature lies?" "Commander Blum informed me and the rest of the engineering team earlier. Sester is interested to find out what it is, and is looking forward to communicating with it." "I didn't ask you here to find out what Sester is thinking," she said. He seemed surprised, which she could understand. 90% of the time, when someone wanted to speak with him, it was because he was Sester's avatar. It must get annoying. "Commander Rabot thinks you might be a good fit for the crew of this mission. Is that something you're interested in? It's on a volunteer basis only." He screwed up his face, producing a small smirk as he did it. He'd accept, no doubt about it. And hopefully it would be good for him, getting out from under Sester's shadow for a little while. Evie turned to see Cass and Zenfor enter the bay, with Captain Grippen behind them. Apparently Cass had found his other pilot. Evie'd had the inclination to volunteer herself, but thought better of it. Her position was on the bridge, helping to coordinate, not on the shuttle flying through Cornu-What. Cass nodded to her as he made his way over, and she returned the gesture. She had to admit, it had taken some time to adjust, but maybe that uniform fit him better than she'd originally thought. But there was still something off about it. No, she shook her head. That was just her prejudice talking. She needed to give him a fair chance. After all, he'd been the one to insist they not destroy the creature immediately. That was Coalition 101, and he had embraced it. In a weird way, she was proud of him. "Everyone," Cass said as he approached, "here's the plan. The Consul, Box, and I will all be on one shuttle. She will monitor our transmissions from there to ensure they reach their destination, and to determine which, if any, are successful. I'll be manning the shuttle transmitting the light signals. Ensign, are you in?" Tyler nodded, with a touch too much enthusiasm. Evie was aware they'd had their conflicts in the past, but it seemed either Tyler had put it behind him, or this opportunity was too good to pass up, and he wasn't about to sour it. "Then you and Captain Grippen will be on the other shuttle. She will pilot, while you transmit the messages using the radiation language Box has devised. Hopefully, one of these two will get the creature's attention, and it will stop its attack. I don't know how detailed of a conversation we'll be able to have, but maybe, if it realizes we're intelligent too, it will allow us to leave." "And if it doesn't?" Raffinkel had come up behind Evie. She hadn't even seen the woman. She could be quiet when she wanted to be. "Then we'll have no choice but to move to Plan B, which will be to seal up the tear in space. Hopefully, the creature will go with it. Zenfor will be able to pilot one of her probes remotely, and will attempt to seal it while we're out there. And if that doesn't work," he glanced around at all of them. They knew what it meant. Killing the creature was the last resort option, but what else could they do? They couldn't let it destroy the ship. And help was still too far away. "What about backups?" Evie asked. "If something goes wrong with the sequences? Or if you're injured in some way? Didn't you say it was turbulent out there, Chief?" "When our wings quit responding like we needed them to, it got jerky. If you're not strapped into a seat like we were, it might be a bumpy ride." "No worries. It'll just be like a roller coaster," Grippen said, leaning on a nearby crate. "You ever been to that one on Altair? That thing is a bitch and a half. It'll twist you—" "You think each ship needs another crew member?" Cass drew his brows down. "Just in case. It never hurts to be prepared," she said. She could tell he was wondering if she was challenging him or offering a helpful solution, which was fair. After everything she put him through the past few days, she couldn't blame him. But in this case, She was actually trying to be helpful. They needed someone else in the shuttles with them in case of an emergency. It was good protocol, even if it wasn't strictly by the book. "I can operate the light sequence," Zenforce said. "At the same time, I'm monitoring the response, if I have to." "So then we'll just need a third person for the other shuttle," Cass said. Evie could get on board with that. She turned to Tyler. "Anyone in mind? Someone to back you up?" "Pearson could do it. Or even Commander Blum," he replied. Evie caught the slightest shift in Cass's body language at the mention of Blum's name. "I'll contact the commander to see if she's up for it," Cass said, turning away from the others. Raffenkel leaned close to Evie. "Are you on board with this? I'm not liking the idea of those shuttles out there alone." Evie smirked. "The captain thought you might have a problem with it." Raffenkel tapped the comm at the back of her hand. "Bryant, Jan, Linkovich, Ayavarone, mount up. We're going to escort the shuttles out there. Reset your anti-grav units and be ready to launch in 30 minutes. 4 acknowledgments came across her comm. "The Corps don't do anything alone," Raffenkel said to Evie. Cass returned from the other side of the bay. Why had he needed to make that call privately? What was going on between them? "She's on her way down. She was happy to volunteer. That okay with you, Tyler?" The ensign nodded. "As long as I'm taking the lead, it's fine with me." "Geez, enough yapping already. Are we going to do this thing or what?" Griffin said, hopping off the container she'd sat on only a few moments earlier. She struck Evie as a person who had to be perpetually in motion, like slowing down wasn't an option for her. "Box?" Cass called across the bay. "Another 15 minutes, boss. We're right on schedule," the robot called back without even turning around. "I'm going to talk to Box again. Go over strategy and stuff," Griffin said with a wink to Cass before sauntering off in his direction. Raffenkel shook her head and turned the other way, headed back to Bay 2. "Great. I'll brief Blum when she arrives," Cass said, headed off toward the bay doors. Evie glanced up to notice Zenforce staring daggers at Ensign Tyler. Cass had mentioned some altercation between them, though Evie had only been half listening at the time. But something had definitely happened. The air around them had changed, as if it had been charged by an electrical shock. "Council? Is everything okay?" Evie asked. "Fine. Ensign?" He glanced up, then back down again. "Yeah, fine." Evie decided she didn't need any part of whatever was going on with him. Maybe Cass returning to the weapons lab that day had been a good thing. But he couldn't have known what he was coming back into. Regardless, it didn't matter now. All that mattered was they get moving. Tempest didn't have very long before it was pulled into the center. She stepped away from the rest of the group and tapped her comm. "Green here. Looks like we're about ready to go down here, Captain. I'll return to the bridge when they launch and coordinate from there," she said. "Very good. Any hiccups?" Evie eyed Cass and Blum, the latter who'd just come into the bay. "Sir, I wonder, is it wise to send both our bridge engineer and our human liaison to Sester on the same mission?" They were 2 of the better engineers on the ship. If something happened out there to either shuttle, or even both, what backups did they have on the ship? Who else could talk to Sester? She had a bad feeling about this rising in the pits of her stomach. "Do you think it's too much of a risk?" Green asked. "I'm not sure. Maybe." It didn't escape her notice. Blum brushed her hand against Cass's arm, though he seemed oblivious to it. "It's your call, Commander. Do what you think is best. Green out." Evie sighed, making her way back over to where Tyler and Zenforce stood. She was still staring at him with an intensity Evie rarely saw from people, while he was doing his best to look anywhere except at her. "Ensign, I'm sorry to do this, but I need you to report back to engineering. You're not going." His eyes snapped to hers. "What? I don't understand. Did I—" "It's nothing you did. But the fact is, you are the primary conduit for Commander Sester, and we can't afford to lose you. Not many people on the ship are receptive to him, and those that are aren't well versed in engineering. I'm sorry, Ensign." "What's going on?" Cass asked, approaching with Blum behind him. "She's taking me off the mission," Tyler said, anger in his voice. "All because I'm the magical conduit." You better watch it, kid. That's not how you speak to your commanding officer, Cass said. This is such bullshit, he replied. Even though he was looking at Cass, Evie felt the comment come straight to her. Ensign, my patience has run out. Are you going to report to engineering, or do I need to confine you to quarters? Evie stared him down. He shook his head, leaving them standing there in the bay. Evie tapped her comm. Karen, make sure Ensign Tyler makes it back to engineering. He's a little hot right now. No problem, Commander, Uma's voice said over the comm. Evie shut it off and turned to Blum. You'll head up the radiation communication attempt with Captain Griffin. I'll pull Pearson from engineering as your backup. Blum nodded. I won't let you down. Cass was just telling me about the mission. Cass cleared his throat. Let me show you exactly what we'll be doing. Consul, will you join us? He indicated to make their way to one of the shuttles. Box was over on the shuttle itself, inspecting the work of the maintenance team. As they made their way over, Cass shot Evie a look, but she couldn't tell what he was trying to say. Was he upset she'd countermanded his orders and used Blum instead of Tyler? Or was there something else? Maybe she'd ask him when they got back. There was too much to do to worry about it at the moment. Evie took one final look at both shuttles and left Bay 1, heading back for the bridge. 30. Prepare for departure, Cass said into the comm. He was at the second station on the shuttle Parnatha, while Bach sat in the pilot's seat. Beside them, the Helicon warmed up, holding Griffin, Blum, and crewman Pearson. Cass had noticed a fair bit of trepidation from Pearson, but he'd accepted, and they were ready to depart. Cass wasn't thrilled with the idea of Commander Blum, Susanna, as she asked him to call her, being on that other shuttle. But the fact was they needed a good engineer, and she had a lot more experience than Tyler. Cass wondered if Zenfor hadn't suggested Tyler because she expected this mission to fail, and they had had such a contentious relationship so far. He turned in his seat to glance behind him. Zenfor had transferred her data from the weapons lab to the shuttle and was making calculations on the large wall screen behind them, paying both him and Box no attention. Cass returned his attention to Box. Ready? Just like old times, Box said, finishing the pre-flight sequence. Helicon is a go, Griffin's voice came through the comm. Space Wings? Cass asked. Lined up and ready to launch at your signal, Commander, Ravenkel's voice said. She decided to join her pilots in escorting the shuttles. Cass also didn't like the idea of a chaperone. But strangely, he felt extra comfort knowing she would be out there with them. Cast a bridge. We're ready to launch. He sat back and engaged his seat restraints. Proceed when ready, Commander, Evie said. And good luck. Okay. Hit it, he said. Box nodded, and the shuttle rose off the bay floor, while Helicon beside them mirrored the movement. Box took them out in a controlled, steady movement. Cass wasn't used to the restraint. Trying to impress someone? Just following protocol. My best moves are outlawed by Coalition pilot regulations. As soon as they exited into open space, there was a discernible shift in the forward movement of the shuttle. That's the electromagnetic field. Adjusting now, Cass said. He'd made a few modifications. The shuttle moved ahead quicker, but still not as fast as it should have. Is that all you got, robot? Griffin said through the comm playfully. Through the window, the Helicon caught up beside them. I thought you were supposed to be a hotshot. Cass could imagine the look on Susanna's face. A smile danced across his lips. She had been very open to helping, for which he was grateful. Though their interactions had been brief, they had always been friendly. Susanna Blum had backed him up when no one else had, and it seemed she always gave him the benefit of the doubt. He hadn't yet found a way to repay her kindness, but her excitement about this mission might be a start. She told him she enjoyed getting off the ship, though she didn't get to do it often enough. There was a sadness in there somewhere, something Cass had only begun to pick up on before moving on to the next important thing. Once all of this was over, he'd have time to give it more thought. The Space Wings have launched, and are in a formation surrounding us, Bach said. I don't know if this thing can register heat signatures, but 7 ships all coming for it at once might look like one big one. Maybe that will help us? There's no evidence one way or another, Zenfor said, her first word since they'd boarded the ship. And it doesn't matter. Box's eyes blinked confusion, and Cass shook his head, willing Box not to say anything further. Zenfor's pessimism wasn't the issue here, and it wasn't what they needed to focus on. Any changes to the creature or the surrounding area? Cass asked. Nothing yet. They were much closer to the center of the phenomenon than they had been before, but ahead of them was nothing but a blanket of black. It was the total absence of anything that unnerved Cass. He enjoyed openness, but this felt claustrophobic, enclosed. It took all of his mental power to tell himself they weren't headed for a trap. Switch to the spectrum view. The windows of the shuttle shifted, so the entire area was alight in the spectrum of color. The black was replaced by background blue, and directly in front of them, in its odd shape, with the tentacles disappearing into nowhere, was the creature. It was fascinating to observe, and he wished they had time to study it. But that would be for the next ship. Now their only job was to convince it to let them go and return on their original mission. If it sounded so easy, then why was his heart hammering in his chest? Caspian? We just switched over. We can see the creature now, Susanna said. Us too. How close should we get before initiating the sequences? She asked. Cass turned to Zenfor. 100,000 kilometers, Zenfor said, without looking up. Close enough so the creature should be able to receive the transmissions without any trouble. Acknowledged, Susanna said. Hey, Box, want to do a couple laps around that thing? Unless you souped up your shuttle when I wasn't looking, Griffin said. No one is doing laps, Ravenkill said. Pilot, focus. We've got a mission here. Just trying to lighten the tension, Griffin replied, disappointment in her voice. Helicon coming up on target. Susanna? We'll try the light sequence first. If we don't get a response, try the radiation. If neither works, we'll do both at the same time, Cass said. Acknowledged. 100,000 kilometers, boss, Box said, slowing the shuttle until it came to a complete stop. Cass began the light display sequence. You're sure you got the syntax right? If Box hadn't built the structure right, they might be sending nothing but gibberish. It's only an alien language no one has ever used before, by a spaceborne creature with no eyes, mouth, or ears. So yes, I am 100% sure whatever you say won't be taken out of context. The robot is sarcastic, Zenfor said. The robot is a pain in the ass, Cass mumbled, finishing the prep sequence. He opened the full channel back to Helicon and Tempest. Initiating light sequence. Small pulses in the visual range of the spectrum showed up on the screen in front of them. Had Cass had left the screen on visual, the flashes might have been bright enough to cause eye damage. Anything? No response. Damn. Plan A was a failure. Helicon, go for your sequence. Light attempt was non-responsive. Acknowledge, Susanna said, initiating now. The screen lit up this time with a fake cryon radiation coming from Helicon in waves. Each looked like a shock wave emanating out from the center, and as soon as the first one reached the creature, it moved. The creature is responding to the radiation, Zenfor confirmed. It has rotated 4 degrees. Now 7, now 10. Susanna, you're getting a response. Keep it up, Cass said, hoping Box's interpretation of the radiation was close to accurate. If they could just get through to the thing, that was all they would need. We're receiving an audio transmission, Box said. It's weak, but it's there. From where? Cass asked. Helicon? Are you seeing this too? We are, Commander, Crewman Pearson said. In the absence of anything else to do, Susanna probably assigned him the comm. It seems to be coming from the creature. Or maybe just below it? From the tear? I don't know. I can't pinpoint it, Box said, his eyes blinking frustration. Zenfor? Cass asked. I can't tell either. Someone is trying to speak with you, though. I suggest you listen. Box tapped the pad to activate the incoming transmission. At first, it was mostly static. But there was a voice in there somewhere. Cass could almost make it out. Can you clean that up any? I'm on it, sir, Pearson said from Helicon. We're getting it too. Cass listened closely. The message sounded like it was being run through a processor, and with all the static, he couldn't quite understand what was being said. But strangely, it sounded like the message was in Coalition Standard Language. And it was a male voice. A human male, if he wasn't mistaken. Is Cap... Ald Row. Reese is mission? He's getting there, Box said. Do you recognize the voice? Do you know who it is? Cass asked. Box shook his head. He turned back to Zenfor. Anything? The source of the transmission hasn't changed, but I still can't pinpoint it, even using the probes that are already out here, she replied, frustration in her voice. This is Regin Morrow. This Shun? Reg Morrow? Captain Reginald Morrow? It couldn't be. Was it possible they were still alive after all this time? It's the captain of the Iphigenia, Box said. I need a location on that transmission now. Cass leaned forward. This may have just become a rescue mission. He opened the comm to full. Captain? Can you hear me? This is Commander Caspian Rabot of the USCS Tempest. Can you give us your location? Commander, thank for coming. You've been lost here for AIDS. The transmission was still garbled, but Cass could still hear relief in the captain's voice. They had done it. They had really survived here all this time. What is your location? Can you tell us where you are? We have 7 ships in close proximity, Cass said. He hit the mute button. Is Tempest getting all this? Box nodded. We're in a place... Wing spaces. I can't describe it. Thank you for... Commander. You don't know how long we've been waiting. Zenfor? Cass asked, giving her a pained stare. They needed to find out where the transmission was coming from. It had to be the Terran space. That was the only thing that made sense. She shook her head in frustration. Something's not right. The transmission is being obscured by something. I should be able to detect its source, but something is stopping me. She glanced up at the rest of her screen. The creature is turned a full 22 degrees. He didn't care about the creature at the moment. All he cared about was finding what was left of the Iphigenia and getting it out of here. Maybe with both ships, they could find a way to break free. He unmuted the comm. Captain, how many of your crew is left? How many do we need to transport back? Not many. It's ain't so long. We're glad you came. My Ip fell into the Amphenam on 27 years ago. I was so foolish. Cass glanced at Box. Something felt wrong. But I wouldn't be here without crew. They taught me much over the years. And now you're here. Pearson? Cass asked. Almost finished, sir. Cleaning out the rest of the interference now. Cass leaned over the comm. Captain, please repeat. That last message didn't come all the way through. I said I wouldn't be here without my crew. They taught me so much over the last 27 years, and now you've come. You can help teach me so much more. Cass furrowed his brow. Captain, I'm not sure I understand. You've come to instruct, just like I did, and just like Captain Worth of the Genesis. We've all come for the same purpose. I followed his signal in, and you're following mine. It's part of the cycle. The last few words distorted, but not by static, but as if the captain had a head cold and everything he said sounded slightly off. Box hit the mute button. Boss? I don't think that's Captain Morrow. Cass whipped around to Zenfor. She gave a subtle shake of her head. I finally got a lock. The transmission is coming from the creature, she said. I believe Captain Morrow is dead.